Hey guys, what's up? Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/eggs show. That's EGGSSHOW. Audible has more than 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or just about any device you can imagine. As Eggs listeners, you can download a free audiobook today by visiting audibletrial.com/eggs show.
Oh, hey there, everybody. The Sandman, Adam Sandler here. I just want to tell you about this great podcast. It's called the Eggs Podcast, and I got some on my face. Get it? Egg on your face. do.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, 1 star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumper's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everybody, welcome to Eggs. Today's guest is Richard A. Chapo, Esquire, internet lawyer for businesses. Richard is located in San Diego, California, and is an internet business lawyer who's been practicing law since 1992. He specializes in helping online entrepreneurs avoid the, quote, crap your pants copyright infringement letters and other threats when operating online. He's traveled extensively around the world, having lived in Siberia and Russia for a year, as well as spending a lot of time in Europe, Central America, and Asia. Really interesting guy, really interesting career, so we won't keep you any longer. Welcome our guest, Richard Chapo.
Thank you for having me on.
Of
Yeah,
course.
no
Thanks.
problem.
Thanks for doing the show and making the time for us. We booked this one quite a ways in advance, so we're grateful you remembered that we even had it. We've had a handful of these guys that we book a month or so in advance, and then they go, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be doing what now? So I really appreciate you being on the ball and everything, and we're really grateful to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Hopefully I'll have something good to say.
Yeah.
Well-
So we've kind of given you a brief overview of Eggs, and essentially what we do is we like to get the backstory on your career from like leaving high school or college and to now, and what you did from then to now to be successful in your field. And as a lawyer, it could be a pretty interesting story. You mind going back a little bit and telling us your backstory?
Not at all. So, a lot of people have gone through a number of rough things when they were growing up. I did not. I was very lucky. I grew up in a little town called Del Mar, which is just north of San Diego. It is a kind of a utopian place on the beach.
The first and only place I've ever bet on a horse.
Yes, exactly. I worked at the horse races. It was a good summer job. But yes, so grew up there. It's on the beach. It's, Lucille Ball lived there. I mean, it's that kind of a place. So I grew up there, and it was obviously a good time and not really particularly serious about life. But eventually graduated from there and realized, I have to start thinking about becoming an adult. Ended up going up to UC Irvine. Which again was an interesting choice because I ended up living in Newport Beach on the beach for 4 years.
That's rough.
Yes, it was horrible. Spent most of my student loans at a couple bars down there on the beach, and ended up finishing that. And I went to Europe, and I ended up madly in love with a young lady in Denmark. And we had that great family moment where your family threatens to disown you unless you return to the country. And so one thing, and it led to another. And suddenly I ended up in San Diego, being threatened with being a salesperson, and I'm terrible at sales. So one thing led to another. I decided to go to law school. And it was a bit of a karma finally for me because my thought in law school was I enjoyed traveling. And so my thought was to try to get into international law, and I'd be able to travel around the world at all these exotic locations, experiencing the world, if you will. And then, of course, by the time I got out of law school in 1992, this funny thing called the internet was turning into a commercial medium. And, with GoToMeeting and all these, various types of services, you really don't need to travel anymore. So that kind of put the kibosh on international law, and I ended up defending wrongful death cases for about 10 years, about 8 years. And so defending hospitals and doctors when their patients passed away and they were accused of negligence or worse. And as you can imagine, that got a little old pretty quick. But,
not a lot of warm fuzzies for the guy that likes to hang on the beach.
Yes, it was a radical turn. And I went from long flowing hair and a beautiful tan to, male pattern baldness and stressed out of my mind.
Overnight. It's amazing how that happens.
Literally
right?
in a week. It was like, Tim Allen and the Santa Claus, where it's a week later and suddenly I gained 40 pounds and what happened. So I hit 1999 and I was kind of done with it, to be honest with you. Defended a case involving an employee at Home Depot who my doctor was alleged to have negligently treated his back injury so that it left him paralyzed, and actually won the case. And I was not really happy about that. So it was a grand victory. The insurance company was very happy, but it was kind of like, okay, this is enough. So I did the logical thing, went to Siberia.
Of course,
totally.
I mean, if it wasn't so cliche, I wouldn't make a big deal of it. But
yeah, well, I'll tell you my state of mind at that point. But I had actually worked with a charity, and they had a CEO from a software company on the board, and I was complaining to him, and he set it up basically. And so the interesting thing about Russia is that, the place is huge, but it has incredible natural resources. Most people know it has oil and what have you. But really it's a rapper's delight. You can drive down the road in certain areas and buy gold chains, solid gold chains for, $10. These just big gaudy things and what have you. And so there were various investment groups that were looking to try to bypass Moscow and get past the corruption and the graft and go directly to investing areas where the resources actually were, which was Siberia. And so I ended up in a city out there teaching at a law school and at a university. The teaching at the university consisted of standing around and speaking English. But the law school was, talking about law and trying to deal with, internationally what.
I'm still taken aback that there's actually a city in Siberia. I think that's kind of the big revelation for me.
Yeah, there are quite a few. There are, one of the unique things about communism is they would find a natural resource somewhere, and then they would just build a city there. And then they would send out notices to people around Russia. Congratulations.
You're moving to Siberia.
This new city.
Well, it's very effective if you're in the town building business.
Yes. Communism had some of its benefits. One of the big benefits, for instance, was air flight. So, those little seats we have to sit in on those capitalistic airlines. Well, on the communist airlines, all the seats are the same size and they're all big.
Oh, I like that.
Never thought of it that way.
That's all right.
Yeah, first time we flew over, it was a glory, except you're hoping the wings stayed on the plane. But
well, there is that.
Yes. Yeah, when I first went over there, we landed in an area called Vladivostok, a city. And we're landing. It's early in the morning. I've never been to Russia before. At the time, I didn't even speak a word of Russian. And I'm looking out the windows, and the airport's dark. There are no lights or anything. And I'm thinking, oh, no. The airport went bankrupt or something of that sort. And we land, taxi up to the airport. Lights come on. They come out and get us in a van, take us back to the airport. I was like, okay, here we go. But anyways, so did that for a year. Then came back here, and I had a friend who I had worked with in the wrongful death law firm who had left and become CEO of an internet company. This would be 2000, and it was a portal for adult websites. So it didn't have adult material on it, but it was like a helpful guide kind of thing to people who are in that industry, which consisted mostly of people buying CDs and republishing them on their sites.
Back when you had to go to the store and go to the back room that had the curtain in front of it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
well, I was going to say, I mean, nowadays you barely need the portal, because it just shows up. It's everywhere. It's in the email and everything. I mean, there is no escape.
It is very true. Anyway, so I did that. They needed legal work, and I told him, well, I don't know anything about this stuff. He said, nobody does. It's just starting out. And so that's how I got into the field. And it was almost immediately very interesting because what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of the technology backing up the internet was developed in the adult arena. Because video compression obviously was a huge issue. And so mainstream companies as well as adult companies were pouring money into the adult industry to try to develop that tech. And it was coming out of places like Atlanta and garages and what have you. And so you're seeing all, not the content, not the sex stuff, but the actual physical tech of, how do we get this video from, the pipe out on the street into the house without, the dial-up modem nightmare kind of situation. A lot of the billing.
The AOL just like...
Exactly. The good old days. And so it was interesting. And there were a lot of, issues, and nobody had even looked at their questions. Could you have, thumbnails or thumbnails copyright infringement, all these kinds of things, which for non-lawyers probably isn't that interesting. But in law, a lot of that stuff had been settled for hundreds of years.
Well, it's interesting because, you wouldn't even think about it.
You just brought that up. I'm like, a thumbnail being copyright infringement. I mean, like, that's one screen grab out of whatever. And I didn't even think that was a thing until you just said that.
Yeah, there was a case, there was a company called Perfect 10 that had all the content, and they sued Google over it because of the Google images. And it was, it was a major case.
That's crazy.
It went on for a long time, and a lot of us were wondering, is that the case? There's still cases over whether hyperlinking is legal. Playboy right now is suing somebody who's hyperlinking to them, and they don't like the site or something about, what that person's doing. A lot of these issues that we assume are set on the internet just really aren't. The baby case, the Prince baby case, it went 10 years, and it was a copyright question. A woman had a video on YouTube of her baby dancing, and there was maybe a 20-second clip from a Prince song with it. And she got sued for copyright infringement by the publishing company.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and people came forward and, helped her to fund the defense, and law firms jumped in on her behalf and didn't charge her. And it went for 10 years with them arguing over, whether it was or it wasn't, and what were the ramifications of those decisions. And,
well, now they just, if that's a thing, they just cut your video out. It's not even an option anymore on YouTube. If it's flagged for anything, copyright, they just cut it out.
Yeah, the algorithms are getting pretty sophisticated. We've had instances, even like in live streaming our show, where we'll play a song that we may even have permission to, and still, their little algorithm snags us.
Yes, and it's going to get worse because Europe is rewriting their copyright laws right now, and they in the U.S., those sites have a certain element of immunity under the DMCA. Although sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
take
can we
advantage
maybe
of it.
talk about that a little bit? Because it just went through some big changes recently, didn't it?
The DMCA didn't so much, but the European version.
Oh, okay.
did.
I think that's what I'm thinking. We have
Yeah.
an office over in Spain, so I knew I was seeing a lot about it.
I might be the idiot in the room, but can you define
didn't wanna say
DMCA for me?
anything.
Like what
Sure.
that is?
So 1998, long ago, believe it or not, Washington, D.C., the political parties were actually fairly reasonable when talking to each other, and they actually passed laws. And one of them, there was a bunch that were passed for the internet. And the idea was they looked at the internet and they said, okay, here's a commercial medium. We can see the potential, but we have all these laws that were established before there was an internet, and they don't apply it's difficult to apply them. So copyright, if you think about, forget the internet, if you think we're back in the days when you just have a physical book, okay, well, copyright infringement was actually fairly difficult. Because you really had to make an effort. Are you going to copy all the pages out of the book, republish them, rebind them, those kinds of things. Obviously, it depends on the specific item, but it was fairly complex. Well, the internet, it's very easy because you right-click, save, and republish. And so the question was, how do they deal with that? And how do they allow websites to grow but try to protect the copyright owners? And so they came up with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in 1998, the DMCA. And there are different provisions in it, but one is Section 512. And what it says, essentially, is a website cannot be held liable for copyright infringement based on content uploaded by a user.
Okay.
So if you think of Facebook, everybody uploads, memes or whatever. Facebook can't be held liable for that as long as it follows a particular procedure, which isn't very difficult. And, obviously the person that posted it can still be held liable. But the idea was to create an environment where sites could grow without, just getting swallowed up by a tsunami of copyright infringement lawsuits.
Well, I don't understand how, like, say, for example, I upload a video and some songs playing in the background, how they can come after me for copyright. Like, how it's just weird to me to think that, like, I could get sued for uploading a video with some song playing in the background and not even realizing it's there. How can they even, with the amount of data that's going and stuff that's getting uploaded every day, how can they even track it? How can they even, like, enforce anything like that other than just, if they notice it, flag it, take it down?
Well, it is difficult. I mean, you raise a valid point. There is so much data moving with YouTube. They have agreements with a lot of the publishing companies, and so they have a database that they track against. Excuse me. In other cases, they're just software programs that go out there and hunt. If it's text, you can use things like Copyscape. There are all these just different ways of doing it. Sometimes they're more advanced, sometimes they're not. And it becomes a really complex problem because, if I really want to maliciously steal your content, I'm not going to get a GoDaddy account and a HostGator hosting. I'm going to go to, a Black Hat host in China. And, I'm going to steal your content. I'm going to post it and you're going to try and get it taken down. And, I'm going to give you whatever the Chinese symbol is for the middle finger. And,
I think it's universal.
It's very difficult to get it taken down. Now, you can go through an expensive court process to, block that pipe into the U.S. and everything else. But, are you really going to spend that money every time somebody steals your content? It becomes pretty difficult. So the big change that's happening, though, you had mentioned change to DMCA. It's actually in Europe. And what Europe is doing is they are coming out with a new copyright directive. And they're saying sites that move, quote unquote, large amounts of content. No, I don't know what that is. But we can certainly assume, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, they're going to have the filters that you're seeing on YouTube. And that they're all going to have to implement those, and they're going to have a proactive duty to regulate that. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The EU hates American companies, and so they kind of tailor all the regulations to attack the U.S. And our president's certainly helping things along in that regard. So that's what they're doing with that. They're also coming out with what's called a link tax. So if you link to a news site or a journalist article or video or anything of that sort, you will have to pay a tax in the EU for doing so.
Wow.
It's a social decision to try to support journalism. Because, as we all know here, and the newspapers are failing and what have you, because their business model doesn't really work very well in a digital age. And so the question is, how do we do that in the U.S.? The media is under attack a bit. In the EU, they're much more pro media, and so that's their solution. How they actually enforce that, how that comes out, the directive's still not done. They're still trying to thrash it through. How exactly that plays out in the real world. It'll be interesting to see. The truth is, if you have a business website, or practically if you have any website, you're already violating many laws. It may be a law in Florida, it may be a law in Argentina. So there's a certain amount of practical, effect as to, how's somebody going to actually find you and hit that. As you mentioned, on YouTube, it's easier because it's on YouTube and people will always look at YouTube. If you have a small blog on, growing potatoes somewhere, the chances of them hunting you down probably aren't, all that high.
Well, and I suppose too, they're not looking for, I guess, sort of empty bags, right? I mean, they're going to go after the guys with some money, as long as they're as long as they're going to sue you, they need to get something out of it. I suppose it's a business decision in a lot of cases.
Yes, the legitimate claims will. There are copyright and patent trolls and trademark trolls, and people will get, they get this letter, Dear John, we found this picture on your website. our client copyrighted this picture. It's his content. You're using it with, you're infringing on it, and damages. We can claim damages up to $150,000 on the Copyright Act, which is true, but we'll settle for $4,000.
So, I mean, like, they can legitimately come after you for 150 grand for taking an image that you found on Google and not realizing it was copyrighted. And then you can take it.
Technically, they can, but copyright law is, it's kind of antiquated. So what copyright law, basically, there are a lot of bizarre aspects to it, but the general idea is, with copyright law, you would have to register within 90 days of publishing your piece, so that image or say a web page or something of that sort. If you do that, then you can get statutory damages. And what statutory damages are simply a set number between $200,000 and $150,000 per piece. And a judge or jury, depending on how things proceed, would assign that damage if they found that you had infringed on the copyright. If you don't register in that 90-day period, you have to essentially prove actual damages. So if you think about a blog post on a blog that has, 400 pages, and one page you have, an image up there that is infringing, and that page has received 46 visitors. Well, what's the value of that? Probably pretty low.
Cents. Say I took that image and I pulled it into Photoshop and I tweaked the color. Does that eliminate the copyright?
No. Well, you get into an issue called derivative works, and it would depend on how much you changed it, but you're certainly probably still going to get a claim. It kind of depends. There's areas of copyright law that are pretty gray right now because the internet has spawned content that nobody really ever thought about. So, for instance, fan fiction. Okay, well, fan fiction is usually based on a copyrighted work. So at what point does that go from being a new independent work to being a derivative? I mean, if you think about Harry Potter, once Harry Potter became popular, there were 5 million books that came out about, an orphan boy who happened to end up at, a magic school. The idea could not be copyrighted, but the actual content could. So if that main character's name was Harry, was that infringing on, the Potter books? And it really comes down to just a case-by-case analysis. It's a very frustrating thing about copyright law. There aren't a lot of, bright lines. A lot of it usually is, and then you get into these kinds of arguments. Because there's also defenses to copyright infringement, which are essentially fair use. And fair use is, there are 4 factors of it that won't make any sense. But basically what we're talking about are situations where society's decided, screw copyright. We need to be able to use this content for something. And you'll see it. So, for instance, in criticism, movie reviews, we all see movie reviews on YouTube everywhere. Well, that's a criticism, maybe positive criticism, maybe negative, but society benefits from that criticism of a book, criticism of, whatever. Or parodies. Parodies are always protected. Saturday Night Live, when they do skits and, they rip somebody off, that's a parody, or The Simpsons. Those kinds of things. So there are certain areas where you're going to be safe. On the internet, I always encourage people to.
With any of those kinds of fair use things, are there, I suppose the line's not so clean as, I don't know, modifying a photo 30% is the line. Like, I suppose it's kind of a gray area always and up for discussion.
I mean, even that in like the parodies, people get sued for defamation all the time. There's got to be like a hard line between, that was a parody and this is me just saying this guy's a piece of crap and then getting sued for it kind of thing.
Right. Well, defamation is another subject, but it would be, you're always, that's why we have trials.
Yeah, it's weird. It's so...
Well, it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, especially as somebody, outside of the legal realm, to think about how, just how much discussion each one of these little points would take to sort of hash out, because obviously the copyright owner, assuming they have some, real vested interest in their copyright and they're not just, squatting on a piece of something. I suppose if they had a real vested interest in it, whether it's financial or personal or whatever, they could really dig in on something. And then you, as the person who's used it or repurposed it or whatever, is doing the same. And I don't know how you ever get anything done.
Well, yeah. And to be honest with you, a lot of this is an evolution of confusion and chaos, if you will, caused by the internet. just because of the nature of the internet. Because think about the next step of this. Many people, many companies, they create content with the express purpose of trying to get it used by other people.
Right.
Yeah.
They want people to take it.
They want the shares. They want the likes.
They want the viral and all these little catchwords, but they want it out there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, then, so yeah, to your point, that further makes the line blurrier because who's to make that argument, or if it works for this guy, you can't really apply a just a black and white rule or regulation to something like that.
Right. So with fair use is it's done on a case-by-case basis, and there are 4 factors I looked at. One is the purpose and character of your use, the nature of the copyrighted work. So is it really creative, or is it kind of a listing of facts or something that's not creative? The amount of the created work that you take and reuse, and the effect upon the potential market. So each of those 4 factors can be different. What if it's 2 and 2? What if you have 3 and 1? And there's been large amounts of money spent for hundreds of years, in the courts and up at the Supreme Court arguing over which of these factors is more important. For a while, the question was the effect on the potential market was more important, and now the Supreme Court says maybe not. And then you have the Supreme Court, change from a liberal majority to a conservative majority, which happened here recently, and it eventually will switch back the other way. And so, yeah, it's kind of a mess. The problem is nobody's really come up with an answer as to how to deal with it, and there really isn't an easy answer. If somebody spends 6 months writing a book, well, they should control that book. And I don't think many people would disagree with that. And if somebody spends a bunch of time making music or a movie or something, I mean, you can understand why people want to control it. Now, at the same time, there should be allowed uses of that content that really don't harm those people. I always tell the story about one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I agreed to represent a friend's kids who had a band, and you get into the music industry there, and they used to get furious because people would, videotape their concerts, their shows, and post it on YouTube. And, they always wanted to serve these takedown notices. And I was trying to explain, you probably don't want to sue your fans. That's probably not a good business model.
Yeah.
But Metallica certainly
yeah,
took
right.
on that
Yeah,
fight.
they're the poster boy.
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, that's one of those kind of gray areas too, because I mean, like, I have a background in the music industry as a DJ, and I'm always using other people's music, making mixes, doing, I've worked in radio. I've also, uploaded a mix of, something I made that wasn't radio content, and I just uploaded it to my site. In my opinion, I'm helping the artist out. I'm promoting his music, but in the artist's opinion, he could have a completely different opinion. So it's kind of like this. I don't know. It's this weird kind of middle ground where it's okay on the radio, but it's not okay on, SoundCloud, for example. SoundCloud's the prime.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good spot to get into the how to avoid the copyright crap in your pants letter.
Yeah, because
as Mike's talking about,
I see one coming my way in about a week.
Yeah, well, and this is something we've talked about. I think it's one of these gray areas in music. Like Mike said, his background's in DJing. And, a very common practice of DJs is to take, other people's published works and mix them together or remix them or do different things with them and then, put them on use them in performance. Also, a way a lot of DJs share their music or whatever, they share it to the websites and they publish their posts here and there.
The problem with like SoundCloud, for example, is they had that download button, and you could literally take the artist track, upload it to SoundCloud, and now it's available for the world to download. And where, for me, I'm looking more on a streaming sense, like, I made this hour-and-a-half mix, this song's 30 seconds of that. So it's not like I'm giving away the artist track, but in that hour mix, there's 30 seconds of that artist that might have an issue with it.
Yeah, so given what Richard's been talking about so far in terms of gray area and copyright management and things like that, it does seem like this could be one of those scenarios that might spur a letter. Richard, do you mind talking a little bit about that?
It might, it just depends on the view you see in evolution, to be honest. Well, first, let me state very clearly, I don't get involved in music copyrights. It's kind of another area. And it's, the music rights actually break down into mechanical rights and all these different things. And I just stay away from that. But you're starting to see kind of an evolution in thought. So new band that's coming out, they're not looking at the old, the old models of building a following and what have you. A lot of people. I mean, you see even Radiohead, what they put out
the
an
free album.
where
they were the first to do that.
Hey,
actually.
what you think?
Yeah.
And so you're starting to see some of that. So there's hope for that in the long run. With the letters that come, a lot of them, are never going to be followed through on.
Just a
you need to
basic
talk
cease
to
and
an attorney
desist
just to have it looked at. But the idea, as a DJ, this doesn't really apply. But in other areas, if you have an online business and you're building your business, create your own content. Even if it's just pictures off of your smartphone or what have you, that's much more credible than buying a stock photo or a stock graphic or what have you. You're going to connect with people much more. Obviously, it depends on your business and what you're trying to sell. But a lot of people, they go out and they use stuff just because it's simple and easy. And I'm not sure it really helps websites. In this day and age, we reach a level of sophistication when I think most people know what a stock photo is, or, and it doesn't really speak well, to what you're trying to do. So, pictures of yourself, or even if you don't want pictures of yourself, pictures of your subject matter, your products, things of that sort, I think are definitely a way to go. I constantly tell people original content, then you're never going to have a problem. If you are going to use content from somewhere else, you obviously want to source it, and you need to, know what right do I have to use this? So you can go to stock photo sites, and there are now niche stock photo sites for food and all these different things. If you're in an affiliate program of some sort, they will often provide you content. You can go to Creative Commons. You have to be a little careful with Creative Commons because a lot of people say, well, Creative Commons gives me a license to use this content, and that's true. But Creative Commons doesn't know who is uploading the content. That's using their license.
So
the person
someone
who
could have uploaded it and set it as Creative Commons when really it's not.
It wasn't theirs to publish in the first place.
Right. If I upload, Rolling Stone Sympathy for the Devil, Creative Commons license isn't going to do anything. It's still, I'm still stealing it. So, and the thing with that is a lot of people don't realize it. They don't know. So, you want to be a little careful there. But with the letters, if you do receive a letter, the first thing to understand is nobody sat down and wrote you a letter. It's a template. And in some cases, the Getty image letters were famous. They were pumping those things out. Small forests were dying. And it is what it is. When people send these things out, don't have a panic attack if you get one. The first thing is just to look at it and try and look at the registration. They should have a copy of, the copyright number if it's registered. And then you look at that and see when it was registered. And if it was registered within the first 9 months of publication, then you may be in for a painful lesson. But in the vast majority of cases, they're not registered with Copyright Office. Think of all the content you've created. Well, have you ever registered anything with Copyright Office?
Yeah, no, I'm actually notoriously bad about doing it. I've got a couple books that I've published and things like that have never been formally copyrighted. Right. They've of course all rock the registered C's or the registered R's or their
just
TMs
throw them
or
on
whatever.
there, but they're not.
Yeah, they're all
licensed.
over the thing. But yeah, it's never been formally registered.
And that's common. And, I have some larger clients who are pretty well known online, and, they create, everything from courses to, all kinds of written content and video content. And at a certain point, as a content provider, they take the view that you were talking about, when you upload music from somebody else that, people are at least getting my name out there. Because, otherwise I'm going to sit around for a month charging them $250 an hour to hunt these people. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing. It almost feels like, at some point you just kind of have to throw your hands up in the air and accept it. It's like you were talking about earlier with China. I've worked with some different, I work in advertising and marketing, and I used to design products with a lady who did like baby products. And she would design these things, and have the molds made or whatever over in China because, just for cost purposes. And then, she would roll hers out, 6 weeks later to find out that it's already been in market for 2 weeks. And, she tried to fight it at first, and she did have like Chinese patents and different things like that. But it didn't matter at the end of the day. You could throw money at it, but you weren't going to get any damages. Maybe they'd stop, but then it would just go to the next shop and they'd roll it out again. There's just no keeping up on it.
It's like buying property in Costa Rica. You're going to need a lawyer. It's going to take 2.5 years. Doesn't matter if the property is big, small, falling apart. great
good
shape.
to know. I'm
whatever.
not going to go
It
shopping
is.
I was
there.
going to say, is that from personal experience? I mean, you're already in San Diego. You got to have Costa Rica too.
Friends that I tried to help, and that was another one of those ones where I was like, "Why did I agree to this?" It's just, there's just some places where, people complain about the law here, and rightfully so. There's certainly, we have all kinds of problems in our legal system, but there are some places that, I mean, you have to be happy what we have. At least you have a slight
something.
chance of getting, some justice out of it. There are places where it's just. I mean, it's just a joke. So.
Well, yeah, I imagine anytime you're talking foreign real estate and stuff like that, it's got to get pretty dicey. Pretty easy for a foreign government to just go, oh, no, you don't own that anymore. Thanks for the money.
No.
So-
Well, yeah, Russia seizing all kinds of things. When I was there, that was certainly interesting.
Yeah, no,
to
it's
watch.
actually been one of my sort of longer term concerns is I have this fantasy of eventually being able to retire in Barcelona where our other office is. And, but then I have these, horror fantasies where I go, oh, but I'm going to buy this sweet apartment on the beach. It'll be my dream place. I'll get over there and someone will be squatting in it and I will never be able to get my house back. And so it's sad. It's a sad retirement fantasy. It's not the happiest one, but.
Yeah, I think with Spain you'd probably be okay, but yeah, no, there are definitely some other areas you want to be a little careful. The more you move east in that area, the more questionable it becomes.
So I don't know if this is an area of your expertise. I mean, it's definitely something that you would have, I assume, some knowledge about. But I wondered if you could maybe help clear it up a little bit. One of the hot things that's been in the news, maybe not as much like in recent months, but sort of in recent years, is net neutrality. And I wondered if you happen to have enough knowledge about it, or if that's an area that you can speak on, and if you wouldn't mind sort of just breaking down what the hell we're even talking about.
Sure. I wouldn't hold myself out as an expert, but certainly I have a pretty good idea of what they're talking about. The infrastructure of the internet is something that most people don't think about, and it is a amazingly unregulated area. And everything from domains to how we're going to move data is mostly contractual. Even you talk about domains, you're talking about ICANN. ICANN was a nonprofit set up in California. It was provisionally overlooked by the Department of Energy or somebody bizarre who didn't actually do anything. We just had this kind of random group that was setting up domains and licensing, the right to do so out to different registers around the world. And nobody really thought much about it until recently. And now it's been moved to more of an international organization. With net neutrality, you're talking about the question of, okay, we have this internet thing. How do we get data from point A to, the actual user? And the biggest question that we initially had was with dial-ups, is we always had the problem of how do you get from the street to the home, and how are you going to resolve this, and who's going to pay for all this, and everything else. And so what we're used to with our model is that, regardless of how we use the internet, we get access to all the content at the same speed and without really any limitations, particularly in the U.S. And conversely, businesses have been allowed to boom because they pay the same rates pretty much regardless of what they're delivering. So if you look at Wikipedia, text-based site, millions and millions of visitors, but their pull on the data pipes is pretty low. There's not much to it. You compare that to Netflix, who's gone to the streaming, really pushing the streaming, and you're talking about massive data movement. With Netflix when they're moving, TV shows and movies and what have you. And so the question is, do the companies that provide the data movement, do they have the right to charge certain groups more? And that's basically the question. And this can be done either charging the companies more or charging the customer more. So you were mentioning Spain. I'm pretty sure this is Spain. It's one of the European countries. Excuse me. When you go there to order your internet service, you have a menu and you select. I am buying, this amount of speed, which will give me access to, tech sites, or, I want the full bonanza and I'm going to be able to watch Netflix and everything else, and they're different prices. The concern with net neutrality, when you really boil it down to it, is can it be used as a form of censorship, whether it be commercially or, from the government, although I'm not really concerned with the government, but more commercially. So let's say Verizon streams videos. that you can watch. Well, what if they turn around and charge YouTube a huge fee, and they don't have that cost themselves? And so YouTube's, well, let's use Netflix instead. So let's say they charge Netflix, a big fee, and Netflix is going to have to pass it through to customers. And so Netflix suddenly becomes $40 a month. And then, Verizon says, but we'll stream these videos, the same movies or similar movies that we have rights to, and you get them free as part of your service when you sign up for us. They have a competitive advantage there. And so, that starts limiting the right of people to get access to information. Many people couch it more in terms of political information or things of that sort, and that's it's a legitimate thought that some sites might load like they do now when you're on cable or whatever speedy connection you're on, versus some that will load because they're on dial-up speed because they don't have the money to pay whatever the service provider is trying to charge them. It gets more complex than that, but that's kind of the general idea.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, I'm sorry to sound like such a novice about it, but I hear it pop up in the news every now and then I see all the hipsters unite to talk about it. But I never really understand what they're shouting about. Because I've sort of felt like maybe they thought it was like a civil rights issue or something, and so I didn't understand how all that worked. I understood the basic, should Verizon pay more or less than the next guy?
I think
got that
the biggest thing people were worried about at the time was the censorship, and that's one thing that scared me. Is I like being able to Google something and get the actual results that I'm looking for.
Right, but the other side of that is there's already censorship going on.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
Google's results are they're not natural.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, have you heard the show? I mean, we could probably stand to be censored a little bit. So no, that's really helpful. Thanks so much. I appreciate you talking about that a little bit.
So where do you see the internet going? I mean, like, do
we want to talk about dark and doomy things?
I know, right? I know, it scares me.
Yes.
But yes, let's
go deep.
Let's go out of the dark side a little bit here.
Okay. So the early 2000s were known as the wild, wild west of the internet. The phase we are in now is to rip off Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. We were seeing different government and economic groups claim their territory online, and we are headed towards something which is called the Splinternet. You do a search on Google for Splinternet, you can read about it.
I'm going to once we're done.
Yes, I didn't come up with the phrase. It's something that somebody else coined, but I
appreciate you citing your source, for copyright's sake.
Yes, exactly. But basically, the idea is that we're seeing the utopian version of the World Wide Web die on the vine. It's being divided up into certain areas, and certainly from a commercial aspect, that's happening quickly. So you talk about censorship, and a lot of people view censorship as, President Trump throwing a journalist out of a press meeting. And that's, exciting and interesting, and, whatever your views on that, are fine. But there's more subtle censorship that occurs that nobody pays attention to. So the GDPR is the new privacy regulation in Europe, General Data Protection Regulation. In Europe, they view privacy kind of like we view free speech. It's very important, whereas privacy law in the United States is more or less a joke. And so in Europe, they passed this new regulation, and it's extremely onerous. You have to do, as a website or an app, you have to do all these different things. It's expensive. It's a royal pain in the rear. And the U.S. newspapers have economic problems, and so they use a model that is very dependent on cookies and web beacons and things of this sort to generate revenue online, and it doesn't fit into the GDPR. So when the GDPR went active on May 25th of this year, a large number of significant newspapers in the United States are no longer viewable in Europe.
Wow,
so
interesting.
If you try to pull up the Los Angeles Times, you get nothing. Well, you get a warning page.
Could they access it through like a VPN if they wanted to?
I suppose there's always ways to hack your way around, but
yes.
But in terms of just general internet, it wouldn't show up in search or anything like that.
Weird.
Right. So VPN, that raises the question: Are they still considered in Europe or not? And you get all kinds of esoterical questions that people hate lawyers about.
Right.
But so that's the kind of censorship that you're seeing in Russia. You can't view LinkedIn. I think this is still the case. It was for a long time. You couldn't view LinkedIn because Russia passed a law that said if you're going to collect personal information from people who are citizens of Russia, you have to maintain servers in the country which contain all of that information and all their posts and what have you. You can play the ominous music behind that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I suppose that's so that we can eventually take it. Is that the plan?
Exactly. So Google and Yahoo and Facebook and all these companies, of course, immediately capitulated. But for some reason, LinkedIn did not, and so Russia blocks LinkedIn.
That's interesting.
That's just kind of the way it is. So what you're seeing is companies, in particular online, and most websites, unless they're just completely hobbies, have to comply with these laws, and we're entering an area where, or an era where you have to decide where you want to be viewable and where you don't. And if I have a client that has an e-commerce site and they have 4 sales a year to Europe, do they go ahead and spend 20 grand complying with the GDPR, or do they block Europe?
Interesting.
They're going to block Europe.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, I mean, unless you're moving some real product, I mean, just the cost of keeping up that stuff would be really difficult. Yeah, right. And that was one of the big concerns that we had, just having our office over there in Spain. I mean, of course, we're, just selling marketing and advertising, so we're not moving a product. But, when all the new compliance stuff came down, it was like, God, what do we have to do now? It's like, and I know even just the way they handle cookies in Europe is different than the way we do it here, although I'm starting to see it pop up a little more. So maybe the rules have changed. Where they actually have
the
to
rules haven't really
notify you and
changed.
ask
Just
you to
people in
get
the
in.
US don't know how to configure their websites.
Right.
Honestly, that's been the issue. But yeah, so you have the GDPR, you have a new e-privacy directive coming out probably early next year. You have the new copyright directive in Europe, and so Europe is going to become an insulated area.
So if I'm starting a website and from scratch or whatever, and I'm gonna take data from my clients. Is it smart to say, hey, I'm not going to sell or share your data to anyone, or should I have a caveat in the little disclaimers at some point saying that it could happen?
Yeah, go the other way. Just say, man, I'm selling your stuff. Be aware.
Well, first of all, you can't say I'm not, because you are. Unless you have your own host and you're doing everything on your own, it's just impossible. If you're taking payments, anything of that sort, you're probably going to use a third-party processor. It's right now, it's kind of all up in the air, but basically we're moving to a new age where behavioral advertising and those things are going to be much more difficult, and where the data collection laws are just, they're out of control. California's passed what's called a GDPR light, basically. It took the Europeans 4 years to do the GDPR, and California did it in 7 days. So as you can imagine, it's a mess. But it doesn't go into effect.
But now California,
until,
correct me if I'm wrong, but California is wildly efficient and seems to have all their ducks in a row. Is that?
You want to hear a funny story?
I would love to.
Revenge porn. I think we can all agree. Yes. I think we can all agree. Not a good thing. So California, a couple politicians here got on their high horse, and they passed a law criminalizing revenge porn. And the only problem was they didn't really actually understand what revenge porn was, and so there was an exception for selfies.
Oh.
And the problem with revenge porn is about 80% of all revenge porn are selfies.
Right.
So they passed a law that wasn't applicable to 80% of the problem. And so,
but they got it done quickly, and they took action, and did their
we'll
best.
save the children. And so, after a year, they quietly amended the law to try to fix that problem. But gives you kind of a good idea of California. If there's an issue, California thinks there's a potential law for it. But I think what you're going to see is a national law. The big tech companies have finally realized, that they're going to have to deal with this one way or the other. So instead of, letting privacy advocates push it through, they're going to come forward and pass it. And it'll probably be toothless or, lacking some bite. It certainly won't be like the GDPR where the, fines are up to $24 million. So, we'll end up with some kind of U.S. national privacy law. So until then, you want to comply with the California law, in the state that you're in, and you just have to look at those. Now, if you're selling into the EU, it's just it's a whole different world. It would literally take an hour to explain, but you have to have a legal basis for doing so, for collecting personal information, and you have to realize that personal information is defined so broadly that it essentially means anybody landing on your website. or your
wow.
app. And so that's why you see the cookie things pop up. They're trying to get consent before those cookies fire off. But, cookies, most people don't go the extra step and then put in a program that stops those cookies from acting until consent is given. So it's all convoluted. The Europeans are just out of their mind. If you look at the biggest companies in the world that are on the internet, none of them are in Europe, and there's a reason. They're just completely out of it. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a compliance person over there in the UK, and I was talking to them because I have a company here that's doing business-to-business sales in Europe. So they sell their inventory to another business in Europe. They don't sell it to consumers. They don't collect any information from consumers. They send the order. They get a check back. And this person told me that my company had to get written consent from the person that they were communicating with at the company if that person used a personalized email address. So bob@xyzcompany.com. But if that person used a general email address, sales@bobsxyz.com, then they didn't have to get consent.
That's crazy. So
it's ludicrous.
Could they, in that situation, if they're doing B2B directly from business to business, they could just set up a private network and do it on their own, couldn't they? Or do they still have some sort of say in the matter?
Are we still recording?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me pause it 1 second.
Because there's an answer for recording and there's an answer for not.
That's right. Yes, no, we are still
realistically,
on the air.
they're never a problem. But you can see the kind of mentality there. Another thing that's out there with the GDPR, a lot of people think they're complying with it and don't know, is the enforcement agencies have said, if you get consent from people, you have your pop-up and they consent to your granular use and all this stuff. That consent doesn't last. It's not permanent. It decays, and you have to get consent from them again in the future.
So what do? Send them an email and say, hey, can we still keep your information?
I suppose you'd have to just put up that cookie block or whatever every time they load your page.
Well, the email is kind of
what
people are sort of looking at. But no, it's one of those things. How do you deal with it? But the real question is, okay, well, how long is it good for? And their answer was an appropriate amount of time.
Oh, okay. Well, that's useful.
2 hours, 4 weeks.
I guess it's all in what's appropriate, They'll do
we
that.
have one client where we're going with the theory that his brother's a little out of his mind and thinks he's a vampire. And so, the theory is he's going to be immortal. And so we view an appropriate amount of time to be 200 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, totally appropriate for him.
So say, for example, I'm a mid-level kind of I've got 100,000 people that come to my site on a monthly basis or whatever. So I potentially have 100,000 names and addresses and data for these people. Say I get hacked. What's my am I just screwed? Am I going to get sued by 100,000 different people? Or, I mean, in the instance that someone gets hacked, we're seeing it all the time. Why would anyone want to get in the internet game if the potential of getting hacked and then just getting every cent you made just sucked out in legal fees? It doesn't sound appealing to me, really.
No, that doesn't sound appealing.
Right?
You've changed.
Yeah, he's putting way too much focus on money.
I know, right?
Yes, yeah, really. Come on, man, move on. No, you're absolutely right. But there's risk with every business, brick and mortar and online and everything else. And the answer, quite honestly, is insurance.
So they actually sell insurance for the case that your website gets hacked?
Yes. Huh. But here's the fun point. They sell insurance for being hacked, but they don't sell insurance for the GDPR.
Well, so
yeah. So that's,
So if you are fined for the hack, the insurance would not cover that. But if you were sued for the hack and have to pay out, X amount to, all of your fine and heavily valued customers, they would pay that. The reason they won't pay for the GDPR is because it's a regulation. Insurance rarely covers regulations unless you get something custom. And with the GDPR being so new, the insurance companies, it's just all algorithms.
Well, and I suppose too, even just making the dollars and cents work. I mean, if the maximum fines could be, what'd you say, $45 million?
24, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's bonkers. I mean, if you were trying to insure, hundreds or thousands of companies and, any percentage of them getting caught up in GDPR law would bankrupt the insurance company.
Right. Well, that figure, I mean, honestly, that figure is intended for Google.
Yeah,
it's not
sure.
intended for smaller users. They're supposed to use proportionality. They're supposed to look at your earnings and things of that sort. A better figure, and this is just my opinion, and we haven't really seen too many actual fines yet, but a better figure would be 4% of your worldwide gross.
Okay.
That's probably going to be more what they're going to look at. And with smaller companies, it depends also. See, Europe's so mad, just completely out of their mind. They created the GDPR because they wanted to unify the laws across the member states, which sounds great. There's 28 of them. They all have different laws. Drives you nuts. And so they wanted to unify privacy law across these groups, but they're allowing the GDPR to be enforced by each individual country. So each individual country has its own enforcement agency.
No standard in enforcement, even though there's a standard in law.
Right. So the UK, they have the ICO. The ICO is pretty reasonable. Their emphasis is primarily on, making sure that you're in compliance and people are protected. And so they had something like, 17,000 complaints last year, and they only issued fines in like 20 cases. Then you have the Germans and the French, and, the first line of their letter is "you're fine."
I was going to say that sounds
fine
just
amount,
like the French.
and it goes from there. So it kind of depends on where you're getting hit from, and it's just the different mentalities in Europe. If you're in France, if you're a French citizen, and you have a Facebook account, and you have kids, your kids have a birthday party. Let's say they're 11 years old, and you go ahead and take pictures of them and you post them to your Facebook page so the rest of your family who lives elsewhere can see them. You just committed a misdemeanor, and you can go to jail for a year and be fined up to $5,000 because you violated the privacy rights of your children.
That's insanity. Oh, it's so crazy.
Well, and that's the thing. So I guess, how much of the enforcement is like sort of letter of the law versus spirit of the law? Like, I can't imagine they're really, going after a lot of parents for publishing their kids' photos. But I guess, but what's the fear, right? Do you need to be afraid? Like, because yes, you did commit the crime or whatever. So could they come after you at any time? Or are there statutes that protect them from coming back? Hey, we finally found those old birthday photos and now we're coming for you.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that at all. It's just more of an example of, the mentality, how they view things. Nobody's coming after you. If you're in the U.S. in particular, even if you're in Spain.
And is that part of the struggle? Is just they have to make these laws so general, so to cover so many bases that it ends up trickling down to sort of consumer level, even though they're largely meant for corporations or whatever?
Well, we hope. I give you, they could have addressed that, and they didn't. So the GDPR compared the only difference in the GDPR in the legal requirements between a company, the requirements that a company like Facebook has to comply with, and a tiny blog that has AdSense affiliate code on it or AdSense code on it is that if you have less than 250 employees, you don't have to keep certain records. Which sounds great, except that if you get a notice, you need records to defend it. So it's kind of an odd thing. Now in California, and as I ridiculed California a minute ago, they actually did something smart, which the GDPR should have done. And in California, they say, okay, we have this GDPR light law, very similar to the GDPR. However, you only have to comply if you meet one of these three thresholds. And the first one is you have $25 million in sales or revenues. 2, you have you generate more than 50% of your revenue by selling personal information. So you're selling leads or you're selling data, big data. Or the third one, you get more than 50,000 unique visits a year to your website, to all your internet properties. That one's kind of low, unfortunately, and I was hoping they would raise it, but they've left it there for now. But nonetheless, they've created a threshold so that if you're just starting out, you don't have to worry about this thing. And clearly, they've thought about it. And the GDPR doesn't matter if you have 1 visitor or 10 million. You're still going to have to comply with aspects of that law. Now, realistically, are they going to come after you if you have a small AdSense site? Yeah, sure they could. Would I lose sleep over it? No. But if you're selling products into the EU, or you're having a lot of interaction with consumers, then you need to be concerned because they're very privacy oriented. The ICO didn't issue many fines, but they got all those complaints. And those complaints were from people who went to websites, and I have clients who've had complaints, even though they're in the U.S. and they have a very small level of traffic from the EU, and we've received people who've contacted us with complaints, and and we've addressed those complaints. But it's much more active over there in privacy than it is here.
Interesting. Well, hey, we've only got a few extra minutes with you, or a few more minutes more. Blech. Sorry, tripping over my tongue here.
Right.
Need more coffee, I guess. Can we talk a little bit about, you mentioned before we got on the call that you do some work in business growth and helping people grow their businesses. And I suppose some of that is sort of how it pertains to setting up and structuring businesses the right way. And I realize this is a big topic, so we'll try and figure out a way to talk about it in a narrow path so as not to keep you another hour. But but can we talk a little bit about, how you approach it, or approach helping a business grow? For people who are interested, Richard's offered a free consult to listeners of the Eggs Show if they mention that they heard about it from Eggs. And so maybe there's, I don't know, the Cliff Notes version of what you might do in terms of business consulting.
I think most people know, the basic things, form an entity, get insurance, that kind of stuff. So let me talk about maybe some other things that are more practical. If you're going to start a business with another person, one of the key things to do is to sit down and not so much create a business plan, but create what's called a founder's agreement. This is an agreement that's going to basically detail how the business is going to work, how each of you are going to, what each of you are going to contribute monetarily, and also from a labor perspective, who has what duties. And then most importantly, what happens if one of you doesn't. There are so many businesses out there that are floating around with what we call zombie partners. And these are people who, everybody's fired up when the business launches. You get a year down the road. And shockingly, you're not making $10 million a month. And, somebody gets disillusioned and they start lagging or not coming to work or whatever it is. And people don't have any documentation as to how to deal with that. And so what happens is the only way to get rid of them is to file a lawsuit in state court using statutory law, which usually isn't great, to try to get them out of the business. And the expense of doing that is so high that it would basically end up shutting down the business anyways. And so you end up with this kind of sort of hellish situation where the business proceeds with one or two of the partners working and one not. But every time profits are kicked out on a quarterly basis or whatever, that person ends up getting money, which, as you can imagine, drives
doesn't go over well for too long, I don't think.
Yes, no, it's sort of suicide murder waiting to happen. But there are tons of companies that run into this problem. So I think that's a very important aspect. The other aspect of it is do due diligence on your potential partners. And people say, I know him, or I know this, or I know that, or I always hear, he's really credible. Really? Why? Why is he credible? Well, he's done this and this and this. And did you check that? Yeah.
Well, nobody said.
So, the last thing you want to do, particularly if you're trying to build towards, venture capital or something, or an angel investor, is have somebody with you that you don't know about. And if people have a problem with you checking that out, including yourself, then that should be a rather large, sign that maybe you don't want to be in business with this person.
Yeah.
Because nothing is more embarrassing, and I've had it happen, where you go to meet with a venture capitalist, they're excited about the project, they hire their attorneys come in and start doing due diligence, and you find out one of your partners, has done something untold, that best not be described in public, has been caught and criminally charged for it. And, suddenly that VC person is much less interested in handing over a large check. And even if you're not doing VC, banks will sometimes look at it. There's the internet these days. It's not that hard to find information about people. So that would be the huge thing. Sure. The other thing that is incredibly important is focus. People, they come to me, I want to start an LLC and I want to start a nonprofit as well, to put the profits into something. And it's like, whoa. Why don't we make a profit first? And see if, by the time you make the profit, how generous you're feeling at that point, because you may find that that's not the case. And also, sticking with what your product idea is or your service idea, whatever it is you're going to do. People have a tendency to wander. Because frankly, there's so much information out there and so much of it's pretty useful and sounds like a grand idea, that people will not focus on their core service or the core concept. And, you talk to them 3 months later and they haven't gotten anywhere with their original idea, but now they're doing something different. And that's usually a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I can relate to that one. Not to get too personal, but I can relate to doing that. It's the bane of the creative mind, I guess. It's difficult to stick with things, but of course, yeah, it makes sense. You've got to give stuff time to actually play out before you jump onto the next thing. So
yeah, I think
ahead.
just the one other thing real quick, exit strategies. Talk about exit strategies with whoever your partners are, if you have them. And make sure everybody agrees this is where we're headed, because your business decisions should reflect that exit strategy.
Right.
If the goal is to sell in 5 years, how you spend your money on advertising and things of that sort is going to be different than if your goal is, to be around in 50.
Right. So one more thing I want to ask you, if you've got another moment.
Sure.
It's not really business related. It's more just kind of, casual information. So it won't require a lot from you. But I'm making some generalizations based on, Newport Beach, living on the beach, now living in San Diego, stuff like that. We sent out a questionnaire to people before the show. And one of the questions was, do you have any suggestions for others trying to get into a field interest or hobby? And there was your response to that question was basically make sure to take the professional-personal life balance issue into account. And I was curious, just as somebody who's worked in law, which is, sort of notoriously a rigorous, profession, something that's difficult for people, with law school and then, actually practicing. How do you do the personal and professional? Like, I know lots of guys from California that can factor in that beach time and stuff, but, what do you do to balance?
For me, I make a lot less money.
Right.
To be honest, I just, I'm 51, and when I was 45, I was probably mentally and physically about 90. And, and there was just kind of a moment where I recognized, what, this sucks.
Yeah.
It really does, and every part of my life was a mess, and I was responsible for that. I was the cause of all of that. It wasn't other people. And so, at some point, I think that, you have to recognize, okay, maybe here's what, society wants, or, the way people traditionally view either your profession or how you think you should act, and kind of have a come to Jesus meeting with yourself and say, well, what do you really care? I don't wear suits anymore.
Right.
I rarely wear suits. I work hopefully just in the morning. I live in a national forest, so I grab the dog and we go motor around in the afternoon. Does the bank account look great?
Yeah, no, I just part of why I ask is my brother-in-law he's chief public defender and has been working in a county in Idaho for 100 years. And, right. But I've seen the toll that type of work and just being surrounded by those types of people and stuff all the time has taken on him. Obviously, I'm glad there's somebody doing that job. Those folks need defense too. And so it makes me, proud of him for doing that, but I can see the toll it's taking on just his body and the way he feels and everything. And that
position in particular is brutal.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. He takes the worst of the worst, and he has to try and come up with defense for people who've done horrible things. And, of course, not always they've done it.
It's not even so much that as I may have, even when I was doing wrongful death, I might have 5 cases at the same time. Mm-hmm. And there would be a lot of dead time. He probably has, well, he's in Idaho, but I imagine he's still probably got 100, 200.
Yeah, they stay pretty busy.
That's insanity.
So, yeah, no, that's crazy. So, anyway, every time I see him, I'm always leaning on him to try and find a better way. And so anyway, I was just curious.
Change is difficult. It was difficult for me. It was, and I had clients when I changed, when I left, wrongful death, I had somebody who was asking me to do it. And so I knew I would, have money coming in, and it was still, a couple of sleepless nights. Should I do this? Should I not do it?
Sure.
But I think ultimately it's just kind of comes down to, particularly as you get a bit older, you start realizing, that maybe, there are certain things that are going to be more important to you than others. When you're an entrepreneur, people say, well, should I build, this website? If I went with these keywords, they have tons of traffic, I can build something profitable. And say, well, you want to work, 12 hours a day on something you don't really care about. Or do you want to work 12 hours a day on something that you do care about? It's going to be harder to get, rankings or whatever it is that's of an interest to them. Picking your passion. And I know it's a cliche and it's a stupid thing to say, but there is something to that, because, when it's Monday morning, are you getting up and are you interested in what you're doing? Or are you going, crap, so,
right.
You have to make that choice.
Yeah, no, cool. Well, thanks for that, Richard. I appreciate it. So anyway, to sort of wrap up, you can learn more about Richard Chapo at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. We'll provide links and all that good stuff. And also, as we mentioned, Richard has generously offered a free consult for listeners of the show. So if you're interested in getting a consult on matters of copyright, business, etc., reach out to Richard. So once again, SoCalInternetLawyer.com, and just mention that you happen to hear about him on Eggs, and let him know we sent you. So with that, any parting shots, Richard? Anything else you'd like to say before we get you out of here?
No, I imagine I've already said too much.
That's all right. We're notorious for it too.
Yeah.
So cool. Well,
Thank you for having me on.
Yes,
Not
of
a
course.
problem.
Thanks for doing it. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody who has tuned in and listened, and we'll catch y'all next week.